Yep.
All right. Well, in other industry news, Llama or Meta introduced this one threw me, what they're calling the Llama herd, which is nothing but a new their term, I guess, because they're playing off llama maybe, but a family of models. Um, so that the herd part is just a whatever, but it is an interesting set of models, and they of course are claiming that they outperform everybody. That seems to be you cannot bring a new model to market without saying you outperform everybody. But it does seem interesting. I think they are natively multimodal. They are I think a very interesting. I think we're starting to see this approach now where they are distillation based models. So they're building a big giant. So their big one is called Behemoth. It's a 288 billion parameter model that they're then using to distill smaller models out of. And this is apparently, actually, I didn't know this, that this is their first mixture of experts model approach. And so seeing really good performance, although questionable, as we'll talk about in a second. But I mean, what was your take? I mean, I always sort of like get about talking about new models because it's like, okay, is this really noteworthy and newsworthy anymore? But what was your take on this? Anything that jumped
Yeah,
out at you?
I feel like the last month has been exciting to look at these foundation models, just because there's been so much interesting stuff coming out with between Claude 3.7 Sonnet, the most recent Google Gemini models, using these mixture of experts offerings, having a more extended chain of thought, having larger windows that can take in a lot of information at once, although you don't necessarily want to be shoving a new database in every single time you want to do a new prompt. So, I think there's mixed value to that increased window size. But be that as it may, so Meta has put its latest models into the ring. And as you say, Charlie, this has always been important. This is important because Meta has been leading the way from an open source AI perspective, at least in the United States. And it's hard to avoid Meta being an option here. I have not heard so far from my developer friends that Meta has been extremely impressive with its new set of models, but that's not necessarily the ultimate measure of success for Meta.
Well, I do think what's interesting, I think there's two things to your point, right? Meta is in an interesting space in that I don't know that anybody, perhaps including them, really understands what their end game is. Like, I think we all understand what the end game is for OpenAI, for Anthropic, for Microsoft. We get where they're going, and they're all taking slightly different strategies on how they get there. Meta doesn't really have a monetization model. It seems like their strategy has been that they need to be a player, that this is the future, but they don't really know how it fits in yet. They know that it will eventually play a role in their core products. And so they wanted to have a seat at the table. That part I think they're succeeding in. I do think, and I don't know if this is by design or not, I do think that they are having this um, an interesting aspect of it is developing is that they're really the only open source model from a major player that people sort of have trust in. And so therefore we're seeing like NVIDIA use them. I've talked to a lot of enterprises that are at least experimenting with, can we use Llama as our backend, if using it as a foundation within Bedrock or using it as a foundation within um, uh, the wow, it just escaped me. The snowflakes, right?
Mhm.
Any of these kind of models where it's like using this as foundation because it is in fact open source and it's open weight. And so I think that they're maybe by de facto, like I said, I don't know if it's intentional, but they're sort of becoming that. If you're trying to do this on your own, you don't want to get subject to having to pay for it. That's where you're at least starting. And so that makes it really interesting. And so the thing I alluded to, so this is going to play into an IBM announcement here in a second, but the thing that I alluded to is the everyone goes on about how they have to outperform, and so people have called into question at least some of the benchmarks that they published with this release. And I looked at this and I shrugged because it's like, you know, I get why the benchmarks are important. I get mostly because it's so hard to evaluate these models. And the issue here is that apparently Meta tuned one of their models for a specific benchmark, which was sort of disingenuous.
Hmm.
But I get here, I land here and I go, well, if this is where it's really going, then does any of that really matter? Am I going to choose to pay millions of dollars using the OpenAI API versus using the meta model because it outperforms by a couple points on some abstract model? Probably not. So, I mean, that was my take, but I don't know. Do you see anything bigger in it?
I think the only other thing that I could add is I think back to a few months ago when Claire Shih, formerly at Salesforce, took over at Meta as the head of business AI. So obviously she has enterprise cred. And I think the part of the strategy here is to simply get more AI out to as many people as possible. But I agree that it's hard to see what the long-term monetization strategy is here, because Meta slash Facebook has traditionally done not a great job of providing business level tech. They tried to do Facebook for business. They have tried to do a variety of different data and analytic services, and anything that's not related to ads has basically sunk. We didn't see, say, Oculus or their VR capabilities become the default enterprise extended reality solution, despite having spent billions and billions of dollars on this. So I think that's still the real question of how they can turn this into a business. How, because in theory, you would think that these meta models are eventually going to turn into some sort of Red Hat like business if they're serious about this.
Well, I'm not convinced that they have enterprise aspirations, but then that
Right.
leads to the question of like, then what's the point of these
Mm-hmm.
models? I mean, and there's plenty of like, I'm not convinced that OpenAI truly has a good enterprise strategy either. I think they're going much more the consumer, maybe the developer route of it. But I still, I think that there's still this open question mark. It's like, how does this benefit Meta's other businesses if that's the ultimate intent? And I don't know if there's an answer, but regardless, I do think I, all of that aside, I actually think they're in a pretty good position in part, at least if to the extent that the goal is market share and mind share, because we're seeing the shifts.